In the book Animal Farm, Napoleon the pig, one of the leaders, decided to educate the new young generation. So he took all the puppies, he had a fresh load of puppies and took them to his own education center, where he would then teach them rigorously for a year, just to come back to the fields, to the farm with the rest of the animals, where he had an army of vicious dogs trained to his command, where he then retook and took over the entire farm as the ruling dictator. The reason why this is important is because the same thing could potentially be happening to the young today. The reason we bring up this story is to show how easy it is to educate a population and to train them essentially to achieve your own narrative. Napoleon's narrative was to take over the farm and become a ruling dictator, because they who controls the education can control the future generations. As Yuri Bezmenov would say, that these long processes of propaganda and communist takeovers always have to start with the education system, because you need a new young generation filled of your ideas. Are we seeing this today, Justin?
Well, I'd argue yes. I think that any power system needs the ability to essentially assign opinions to people. And as repugnant as that may sound, there arguably is a time and a place, I would think, for this. The catch is that as long as you are assigning opinions that are based upon good, moral, upstanding values, and that in itself is a complicated question, then all of a sudden you can have society operating, on the same page. My favorite go-to example is we all stop at red lights and go at green lights. Yes, we're assigned an opinion that probably makes sense to do that. And in its grand scheme of things, it probably does. But Josh, I think to your point and to what from Animal Farm, with the point they were trying to make there, I think the problem that people run into here, when you have a system that enfeebles the mind and prevents people from realizing that their opinions are being assigned to them, that's the problem. See, the thing is, I don't actually think the problem is that opinions are being assigned. Like, I think we actually need that. Like, you, I, and everyone else cannot sit down and have, a PhD philosophical treatise on why we should or should not stop at red lights or any other, small thing under the sun. We've got to take some off the shelf of the stuff. And this is, education coming through and filling it up. But the catch is in all of this is that when we have these opinions, we have to have an internal corrective mechanism. This is like the moral compass. Like, does this or does this not make sense? And this is where you get back into what Bezumov was talking about. I think Bloom was talking about it too. When you have like the closing, as Bloom would say, the closing of the American mind, or as Bezumov would say, you have the demoralization process. What goes on is that you have the natural like check mechanism in the mind that would audit opinions that are assigned to it. Say, hey, wait a minute, 98% of what we get in makes perfect sense, but there's this 2% here. We're not saying it's wrong. We're not saying it's right. We're just saying we need to keep an eye on it. There might be some problems here that develop. But when you shut down like that part of the mind, when you take the puppies to the special education camp, that's, I think, when you get into dangerous territory. There's another tie-in from another name who's known in economic circles as well as some other darker circles, George Soros. And Soros made a book in 2008. Don't ask me for the name of it, but he basically commented that one of the ways that he's been able to do what he's been able to do in the market, and to be fair, the dude's had success in the market, credit where credit's due, is that he will identify a trend, like the actual like reality of the situation. This is actually what's going on. And then you identify another trend, which is a perception. And here's where it gets interesting. The perception is actually a misconception. So the perception actually isn't necessarily directly tied into the trend, but the way that the trend actually is and what people perceive, the way they interact, for the time being, they interact in a way that positively reinforce themselves. So in other words, the delusion, the lie, whichever fancy term of art you want to use, they self-reinforce each other. This is where you get back to, I think, the Animal Farm tie-in, where if people can actually think for themselves and say, okay, well, wait a minute, there's actually a divergence here between what actually is going on and what I believe has been going on. And so therefore it should trigger the internal mechanism and say, hey, we need to have, a come to Jesus moment and see exactly what's going on here. That ain't happening. And the reason it ain't happening, and Josh, I think this is to your point, so let me know if I'm right here, is that you have the education system that's been designed to completely shut down, to blunt, to turn off, and eradicate, this moral guiding compass to say, okay, wait a minute, is this or is this not true? In favor of thou shalt always accept what you are told, and thou shalt not think about it. And if thou dost think about it, you're a bad, horrible, racist, blah, 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 whatever.
Let's think about the structure of the school system. You grow up and you're sitting in a classroom from 7 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. every single day. What is it that you're being taught? You go from class to class to class, just being told information. Your thoughts are being forced upon you for 7, 8 hours a day. every single day for 18 years of your life, and then you go into further education where the exact same things happen. What are they training here? They certainly are not training entrepreneurs, business owners, because the schedules are never set and defined. There are problems that arise that you are forced to solve. You are not learned any problem solving abilities in schools. In fact, you are only taught to regurgitate information. So, what is it that is going on in the school system though? They are forcing employees on the mass generations because that is essentially what you do. You are told to do this every single day for the rest of your life in the school system. Then you go on to do that exact same thing for work, and you're supposed to be happy. As Klaus says, you will own nothing and be happy. I would say the school system is forcing these thoughts and subconscious actions down your throat every single day of your life. And it takes a very, very small portion to revolt against that. Another thing is, why has the school system not changed for the past 200 years that it's been existed? Everything evolves. There's not been a single technology or innovation in the school system that has evolved it in the past 200 years. Is that not something to question? Is this just the one all be all greatest form of educating a society as humanly possible? I would argue no. In fact, it is probably counterintuitive. Did not learn a single thing in the classroom in 18 years. Not a single thing, barely basic arithmetic. If you saw me write, you would think I'm writing in Chinese or something. I can barely spell, and I'm half retarded. Sorry for my language, but I learned nothing until you start to educate yourself on your own. It was just useless jargon, just getting jammed down your throat, and then you're told you're dumb if you don't say it back correctly. It's just bogus to me.
Josh, as I'm fond of saying, when it comes to graduation, I am convinced that they are laughing at us because they put those square caps on people's round heads. And I think that's symbolic of showing how they have perverted, that's probably the wrong word, of how they have manipulated and distorted, the way people think. Yep, as far as education goes, I see it as I will give a pass to the concept of, Josh, to use your analogy, sometimes you have to ram things down people's throats or whatever, right? Just to get society on the same page. I will concede that point. But the point I will not concede is that you cannot also turn off, like, the spark of curiosity, the spark of questioning in the mind. That's, the
And that
closing of,
is crushed in the school system. Any
yeah.
form of curiosity. Just think about it. You're stuck in a classroom with your squiggly eyes just staring at the teacher, being hypnotized, not listening to anything. I'm sure if 95% of the people watching this, they would just sit in class, just dozing off, just listen to whatever the teacher says, and then copy off the person next to you during your tests. I mean, it was just utterly useless towards any form of critical thinking or problem solving abilities that are taught. And it's just I'm so angry and passionate because the school system wildly failed me. Because once I learned that I love education and actually learning, I wasted 18 years of my life doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, well, like I said, you have the difference between the consensus monster, which is, I think, what the school system reinforces, and then I have the actual, like, critical thinking. But Josh, this is what I would leave it at. The core summation of all of this is that people who can critically think are inherently dangerous to a system that whose power rests and resides on the concept of consensus, especially if you need the consensus in order to wield power within the system. So